Welcome in to One of One Sports. It's time for our college football Week 13 analysis and takeaways. Several big games, several surprises. Let's break it all down. And starting off with the biggest game of the weekend, and in my opinion, that was Arizona State taking on BYU, and they were able to win it 28-23, and this one got wild. I mean, ASU jumps up to this early 21-0 lead. And at this point in the game, I'm thinking, all right, this is the second week in a row that ASU is like really taking it to an opponent that's supposed to be like a challenge for them. First Kansas State last week, jumping up 21-0 as well. Then BYU. I think the game's going to go similarly. And then for BYU's side, the offense is once again struggling. And it looks like maybe this is a team that's just run out of gas, right? They were good in the start of the season. And after the Kansas game and then escaping Utah, then losing to Kansas, it seemed like maybe this team just didn't have quite what they did early in the season. And then things get really crazy, right? BYU scores on a bunch of drives consecutively. They miss a couple of two-point conversions, or they get one, but it's 28-23. And the ending was absolutely wild. From BYU actually have a chance to go down the field and win the game. You have the ball, and then you throw the interception. The game should be over right then. But ASU's strategy, not the best strategy. From my opinion, once you get that interception and you've got first and goal with a little over a minute left, I think you can either just try to score. I mean, you have Cam Scatabo, your best player. You can trust him to try to run the ball and hand it off. Or if you think fumble's too risky, you can just take knees, and BYU will get the ball back eventually. And this is all because ASU doesn't like kicking field goals, which I'll talk about more in a second. But you could just take the knees, and then BYU would have to go like 90 yards with like 20 seconds left, which and score a touchdown. And instead, they picked a third strategy, in my opinion, by far the worst one, to try to like run backwards to run out the clock and then take knees. You end up trying to throw it out of bounds to use 7 seconds. You end up leaving a second on the clock. The students storm the field. Then you got to get them back off. And then you actually allow BYU to catch a Hail Mary, in which you almost attempted to have 10 players on the field, barely got the last guy out. You let them catch the Hail Mary. Luckily, Retzloff didn't have the arm, so it comes up short. But yeah, it would have been an all-time collapse, and it's set up not being able to take field goals, so having to go for fourth downs, which you couldn't get a couple 4th and 1s, and then not being able to run the clock out after the interception, blowing a 21-0 lead, allowing a Hail Mary like that. It would have been a historic collapse, and it would have been terrible because this was the biggest game ASU's had in decades. Huge game for that program. Putting them atop the Big 12. Putting them in position to play for a Big 12 title, to maybe go to the college football playoff. The crowd was all sold out. It was the most expensive ticket you could find this weekend. At one point, the lowest ticket was selling at $300. The students were pumped. This game was crazy, and if it had ended with BYU catching a Hail Mary and then blowing the game like that, that would have been just awful for them. So I was glad to see them hang on, win 28-23. I think Keddy Dillingham's got to work a little bit on that late game stuff. And this would all be so much easier if you guys have a kicker. I was a little confused because he makes extra points, and having a field goal in a couple of those spots wouldn't have been too much farther than extra point, or too much further than extra points are. So I'm a little bit confused on that. But yeah, you got to figure out the special team stuff, and yeah, the clock management at the end, not great. But you're able to get through it. BYU on the other side for BYU, you're still alive. Only 2 losses. Now you need help. You need probably Kansas State to beat Iowa State. And then on the ASU side, you got your rival Arizona, one of the weaker teams in the Big 12 this season. They've been a big disappointment. Just got crushed by TCU. On the road in Tucson, can't take anything for granted, as I think a lot of teams found out this weekend, and we'll discuss more later. But you win that, you should set yourself up to be in a play-in game for the college football playoff, which is way more than I think any fan could have asked for coming to this season. Great for the program. And yeah, like I said, BYU, you're not finished yet either. You're going to need some help, but win your games. You still got a chance. Moving on to our college football right and wrong. And the first thing, we're going to start with wrong because it was very wrong. I tried call a big upset, take Virginia to beat SMU, because I did a few weeks ago when they played Pitt. They played Pitt on the road. I picked Virginia. They won. And then I was like, I'm going back to the well. I think Virginia can pull off a SMU team that, could be relaxing, feeling like they're good going to the ACC title. And no, SMU, just rolls completely. There's not too much to say here. Virginia was not competitive. I completely missed the mark on this one. Just got it completely wrong. Something I was right about, though, and this is like a season-long prediction. The first video I made on this channel is a video like called the College Football Theory, where I broke down returning production, what it means, if there's any conclusions we can draw for it, and basically if any teams with more returning production on either side of the ball would improve. And basically the whole video ended up saying that Iowa State should see is the most likely team to see improvement because of their returning production on both sides of the ball, and they should jump to like a 9 or a 10 win team, and they hit 9 wins and are potentially going to be a Big 12 title contender in college football playoffs. So it's like a long first video on the channel prediction, and it came to fruition. So I wanted to shout that out for something I got right this weekend, as they hit 9 wins. Next, who were the most surprising teams from the weekend? And we got a lot of choices. And starting off in number 3, the Florida Gators. Now, the reason they're not higher is because although it was a big point spread, I think almost 2 touchdowns, Ole Miss was favored by, I wasn't like shocked that Florida won because Florida's been playing better football. You just beat LSU, and when DJ Lagway's healthy, they're a lot better team. They're a dangerous team. So I wasn't, it was bordering on being more impressive than surprising. But I was still surprised because Ole Miss was coming off a bye, and after beating Georgia, I thought this was an Ole Miss team clicking at the right time, going to finish the season strong, head to the college football playoff, and be a really dangerous team. And now, you have your whole season on the line, because if you lose this game, there's a decent chance now Ole Miss is not going to be in the college football playoff. So for Florida, kind of play spoiler like that was a little surprising. Shutting down Ole Miss offense, a little surprising. Yes, they had struggles throughout the year, but I thought it was going to be, kind of figuring itself out. And, Florida just came to play, picked off Jackson Dart, especially at the end of the game. Several in case the first one didn't happen, they picked him off again. So tough for Dart there. Florida just made enough plays to win this game. On the Ole Miss side, it hurts. This was supposed to be your year. You now got 3 losses, and they're pretty brutal losses. The Kentucky game, you allow that big fourth down play, and you're at home. You should definitely beat Kentucky. Your offense stagnates. You allow that huge fourth down. You end up losing. Then against Ole Miss, you're in control the whole way through, never trail, end up allowing it to go to overtime, and you end up losing the game. And then Florida, off of bye, your season, you've regained control of your season, you're there, and you let down again. So that hurts. Maybe there's a path for them to still, maybe if crazy stuff happens this weekend, we'll see where the committee places them in the ranking. Maybe they still get in the playoff. Right now, I don't think it looks great for them, which is tough to see. And, that's why Florida is our third most surprising team from the weekend. Our second, though, is Auburn. You win 43-41 against Texas A&M in 4 overtimes. Before I get into this overtime rule is just so bad that when you get into the third overtime and you start doing 2-point conversions, I can't stand it. There's so many different things that I would try. Maybe eliminate field goals from overtime, so teams have to score a touchdown. Maybe you have to do a 2-point conversion after every touchdown instead of just after the first. There's so many different things I would try instead of just alternating 2-point conversions. I think it's terrible, and I think it needs to be removed. Back to Auburn, though. They were only, they started off as only like less than a field goal underdog, and I think it came down during the day. I saw it get as low as 1. So not a huge upset in that regard, but I was surprised the way they won, because Auburn has not been able to win close games, and they've really choked throughout the season. I was joking around calling it like Auburn's going to Auburn, throughout this game. And, in the fourth quarter starts, and Peyton Thorne on cue throws an interception deep in their own territory, and then ends up taking the lead. And I'm like, oh, yeah, it's happening. And then Auburn looks like they're going to score, and then they start, wasting the time management's not great, but A&M calls timeout for them. They will set them up. You end up going to overtime. But then once you got to overtime, I was like, yeah, this is not the scenario. This is not the way Auburn wins games in tight games like this. And then they actually do. Their receiver's able to make a big play. The A&M receiver drops it, and that's how you win the game. And that's huge for them. I think Hugh Freeze in this program needed to get a big win like this, and at home, this was really your last. You have Alabama, but I think you need to get one of these last 2, because it's been a really brutal season. Not shocked Auburn won. Shocked they were able. I thought if Auburn won, it wouldn't be like a down to the wire game, especially in 4 overtimes where they'd be able to come through. I thought in that scenario A&M would win for sure. On the A&M side of things, obviously your season not over at all. You beat Texas, you're going to the SEC title. But this one hurts. 4 overtime loss is always going to hurt. You feel like you were right there. You had the lead, just needed to get one more stop. So it's a really painful loss. but you got to pick yourself up off the mat. You got Texas next week. Winners going to the SEC title. Simple as that. So you gotta move on. Yeah. But our most surprising team from the weekend, maybe you guys see this coming. It is the Oklahoma Sooners defeating Alabama 24-3. And this was shocking on many levels. First off, just holding Alabama to 3 points was shocking. That offense, yes, it's had times where it struggled this season, but especially recently, they'd been rolling. And I know Alabama fans, and I agree, like they did score a touchdown. That call on Ryan Williams was, a terrible, terrible call, and it probably ruined any chance Alabama had a comeback. But the facts are you were down 24-3 already in the fourth quarter. You probably weren't going to win anyways. Now, I know they ruined any chance. It's a bad call. They should have, that can't happen. But I don't think you obviously can't blame losing on that call when you're already down 24-3. So Oklahoma's defensive performance was pretty shocking. And then when you think about Alabama, just had to beat Oklahoma and Auburn, and they're in the playoff for sure, going to SEC title. That's all you got to do, and you slip up against Oklahoma. And it's funny because in the preseason, I picked Alabama to lose this game. But yeah, by this point, there was no way I thought Oklahoma could still win this game. The offensive struggles we'd seen, even with Jackson Arnold coming back in, who's played better than Hawkins. I mean, you blew the Missouri game with his fumble, and you couldn't put up a ton of points. You had to rely on your defense. We saw what happened in the South Carolina game. Now it was mostly Hawkins, but still. And just this Oklahoma offense, we've seen them play throughout the course of the season. It's not been good at all. The Alabama defense have been playing much better, shutting out Missouri, than pretty much, shutting down LSU. And they've been playing great. And Oklahoma moved the ball pretty well. Could have put up more points. Missed a couple of opportunities, actually. And the Alabama offense couldn't do much at all. And their season, like Ole Miss, potentially, going to end in a very big disappointment because they could easily miss out on the college football playoff now with 3 losses. Now, maybe they can still get it, but again, it doesn't look good for these 3-loss teams, in my opinion. And this one was easily the most surprising result of the day, at least in my opinion. Maybe you think it was Auburn, Florida. This one was the one I was like, wow, that one was shocking. Yeah. As far as the most impressive teams go, I want to start off with Notre Dame, who beat Army 49-14. And I'm sure I feel like people probably got to try to discredit this, but I don't think Army's a bad team. I mean, to get undefeated to this point of the season, sure, they may have been overrated because they played weaker competition. Maybe weren't a top 25 team, but I don't think anyone was like Notre Dame's going to just crush them the same way they crushed Navy. And they did, so I was impressed. Now, it's not like it's super impressive, like, oh, Notre Dame crushed Army, you got to move them up in the rankings a ton. No, it's not like that. But I thought Army would be more competitive, getting through the American the way they have, and they weren't. Notre Dame handled them easily, so I was impressed by that. Riley Leonard played well. You were able to put in the backup. He still played well. You ran the ball well. You stopped the run. All around, it was a really good performance for Notre Dame. And I also think you can't take this for granted when we've seen Notre Dame you lost to Northern Illinois. You could have lost to Army. Those are the facts, right? You lose to Northern Illinois. A lot's on the table there when you lose to Northern Illinois at home. So whenever Notre Dame comes out and just handles business, I'm at least a little impressed because there's always, in the back of my mind, could this be like the day the offense isn't there, get into a dogfight and get a little unlucky? It's always in the back of my mind, and maybe some turnovers happen. But they haven't done that. They've just been rolling teams, and it hasn't been the toughest schedule. But, you rolled Navy, you rolled Army, who were ranked at the time. You beat a Louisville team. You beat a Georgia Tech team who beat Miami. So I've been pretty impressed with Notre Dame. Second is the Kansas Jayhawks. Maybe some people think this should have been surprising, but like Florida, when I said they were bordering on impressive with how they've been playing lately, Kansas, when you take down Iowa State, who was leading the Big 12, then you take down BYU, who's leading the Big 12, or Iowa State was second. And then you take down Colorado, who's was one of the leading teams in the Big 12. I'm just impressed at this point. And I think Kansas became the first, I don't know if it's first team ever, or first time in like 20 years or something, like some time frame, but to have a losing record and have 3 straight wins over ranked opponents, which is pretty crazy. But this Kansas team clearly had the talent. They were like in the preseason. Probably some people picked them to win the Big 12 or at least be in the mix there. I think they were a preseason top 25 team. I can't remember exactly, but at least, in the discussion for that, Jalen Daniels, Devin Neal there, Lance Leipold's been a great coach. So there were a lot of expectations for a team people thought could do really well, and they played a lot of close games early in the season that didn't go their way. And Jalen Daniels wasn't playing, his best football, but now he's been better. And Devin, the run game has reestablished itself. This is one of the hottest teams in the country. And right now, I think they could beat anybody in the Big 12. If a couple things go differently early in the season and Kansas was somehow in the mix for the Big 12 championship, that's the level they're playing at right now. This is just a good team, so I'm more impressed than surprised because they've already shown us the past couple of weeks they're just a good team at this point in the season. You don't really want to play Kansas, especially if you're in the Big 12. If ASU had Kansas next week, I'd be concerned. So yeah, I mean, I'm impressed by the Jayhawks. And then on the Colorado side, another team season not completely over. You're gonna need some help. BYU's gonna need some help. You need more help than them probably, and it's unlikely you get to the Big 12 title. So I know it's gonna be disappointing because it seemed like you were gonna get there, and Shador's gonna leave, and Travis Hunter's gonna leave. But I think when you look, you've recruited Julian Lewis. Dion, I think, is probably going to stay. And just when you look at it, go macro for a little bit. Just, 3 years ago, you could very easily argue the worst conference in the Power 5. You've been turned around to, with 2 games in the season, you're in discussion to make the college football playoff. You got to be happy with that. I know it's a little disappointing to not make the playoff, but you're right there. It was a great season, and this program's clearly on an upward trajectory, and you can't be too mad about this. I mean, it's been no one in the preseason was really predicting Colorado to the playoff. This has been a great season, successful season by really any metric. Moving on, our most impressive team from the weekend is going to be the Ohio State Buckeyes. Now, this is weird to say Ohio State was impressive when they beat Indiana, just on a historical basis. That's strange. But I thought Indiana was going to win this game. Indiana was coming off a bye. I thought they'd be the better coach team. I thought they'd execute better than Ohio State. That Ohio State would have issues running the ball with their O-line. I thought they might have troubles in coverage. But instead, it was Indiana had serious problems with the O-line. Ohio State was pressuring all day long. Curtis Rourke didn't have time. The O-line for Ohio State held up fine. Ohio State definitely executed better, specifically on special teams, where Indiana had a dreadful, dreadful performance. And really, I don't think they could have won this game if special teams played better, but special teams gave them no shot of even being in it with how bad they were, which is disappointing to see. And Ohio State, if I pick you to lose a game, in this spot in a big game, and you roll convincingly, therefore I am impressed, right? I thought it was going to go the complete other way. I was wrong, and I was impressed by what Ohio State did. And now, if you get by Michigan, which, you should, but like I said, I thought Alabama would get by Oklahoma. I thought a lot of things throughout the season have gone wrong, but you should get by Michigan and set up that rematch with Oregon. Probably will be a 1 versus 2 in the country and should be a great game. On the Indiana side, it's weird because I was thinking before the game, if Indiana gets crushed by Ohio State, they shouldn't be in the college football playoff, even with 1 loss. The resume is just not good enough. But now when you see these SEC teams having 3 losses instead of 2, and some teams falling out, it makes it more interesting. Because I was thinking these teams are going to still have 2 losses, and I'd put them ahead of a 1-loss Indiana because of the weak resume. But when you have 3 losses, it's a lot more interesting. And now Indiana, when the day started like that, I thought, they're in trouble. And then the day kept going, and I was like, Indiana might be fine. Might be still be getting to the playoff. Definitely still have a chance. We'll see how much the committee punishes them for this loss. But more so, just Ohio State was really impressive. And, Indiana, no shame, right? Like I said with Colorado, when you have a season this good, this unexpected, there's no shame in losing to Ohio State if you're Indiana. I mean, this is probably the greatest season in the history of the program. You can't be too down about it. But moving on to our playoff look-in, and I got to preface, it's not what I think the committee will do, and it's not what I'm projecting the final playoff to be. This is what my playoff, if I was in charge of seeding the bracket, this is what I would go with at this moment, and then I'll kind of explain why I went the way I did. So this is what I got. Oregon at 1. Don't think anyone's really arguing. Consensus number 1. Georgia I have at 2 because I would have them ranked above Texas, and they'll be in the SEC title, and they're the highest ranked. For me, they'd be the highest ranked team out of the SEC, and I would have them ranked above SMU, who would be my highest ranked team from the ACC. I think when you compare them to Miami, very similar resumes. The loss to BYU still not as bad as the loss to Georgia Tech, and then the Pitt's wins getting worse, but still probably better than Miami's second best win. Both beat Louisville. It's really, really tight there. I slightly favor SMU, and like I said, it's not a projection. If Miami beats Syracuse and SMU beats Cal and they play in the ACC title, right now I would, as of now, I pick Miami to win that game, and I think Miami's a better team than SMU. But that's not how you do rankings. It's got to be merit based. So right now I'd have SMU 3, And then I'd have Boise State 4. It's tight with them and SMU because Boise's lost to Oregon. Obviously not bad at all. Oregon's number one team, undefeated. And Boise beat UNLV, beat Washington State. But that Washington State win has gotten worse. UNLV, it's not anything special. And the resume outside of that, not really there. So that's why I have them 4. Still ahead of the Big 12 champ ASU, who's at 5 with those 2 losses. I'd have Boise State ranked ahead of them. You lose Texas Tech, Cincinnati. It's not great. Yes, Cincinnati was with a backup quarterback, and you've since beaten BYU and Kansas State, and you're rolling. But I'd still have you behind BYU. Ohio State's at 5. Again, I don't think people really dispute that one. Notre Dame, Tennessee, Miami, Penn State, Texas, Indiana round it out. All one-loss teams aside from Tennessee. So Notre Dame, I went with at 6, ahead of Tennessee. I think we compare them. Notre Dame's got at A&M. Tennessee's got Alabama. And then Tennessee, you lose to Arkansas and Georgia. Notre Dame, you lose to Northern Illinois. So Tennessee, the loss to Georgia, not bad. Arkansas, not great. Notre Dame's obviously worse. But then Notre Dame, you beat Army like you did. You beat Navy like you did. You beat Louisville. You beat a Georgia Tech team that beat Miami. I think it's a strong enough resume to be ahead of a 2-loss Tennessee. But Miami, I don't think you have those quality of wins because the Florida win, I think clearly Florida wasn't as good as they are now, so I'm not really giving you as much credit for that. And then you lose to Georgia Tech. You also beat Louisville, but, that's really all you got on the resume, so I think a 2-loss Tennessee is still above them. But ahead of Penn State at 9, who you barely escaped Minnesota, and that's maybe your best win of the season. Maybe you could say Illinois. Minnesota beat Illinois, but whatever you want to say there. Then you're looking at teams like West Virginia, Wisconsin. It's not a great resume at all. Same with Texas. Texas can obviously boost theirs if they beat A&M. The only difference between Penn State and Texas, because I think they have similar level wins, is Texas got crushed at home to Georgia. Penn State was a little more competitive, and I have Ohio State when they played Ohio State at home, and I have Ohio State ranked ahead of Georgia. I know they're at 5, Georgia's at 2, but in the actual rankings, Ohio State's 2. It's just the way the playoffs formatted. And then, I've got Indiana getting that 11 spot right now. On the outside looking in, I'd have a 3-loss Alabama. I'd have a 3-loss Ole Miss. I'd have a 3-loss Texas A&M. I'd have a 3-loss South Carolina, all on the bubble there. Then I think the teams close to ASU, like an Iowa State, a BYU, Colorado, all in the mix as well to get that Big 12 spot. And then outside of that, I don't think there's really too many more bubble teams because Army, I think, is pretty much done. The ACC, maybe you think Clemson could, if Clemson crushes South Carolina convincingly, they could maybe backdoor their way in to the, getting into the field. And then you're looking at the SEC. I named all their bubble teams already. The only other team I would see is maybe a Tulane from the American, which we'll actually be talking about shortly. So we can move on to our other games. And Penn State or Minnesota, I touched on briefly, 26-25. PJ Fleck probably going to regret kicking the field goal. Well, definitely going to regret because you kick the field goal and then you never get the ball back to try to take the lead. You could have gone for 4th down, try to pull off the upset. You don't. So that's tough to see. Penn State, I'm not too impressed with, to be honest. Nebraska over Wisconsin put in here just because Nebraska broke the longest streak in college football without making a bowl game. They finally got there. I thought they might not. They were 5-1 and they were on a, I think, 5-game losing streak or 4-game losing streak. But either way, they got to 6 wins, which is what they needed to do. Then Boise State over Wyoming wasn't pretty, but you got the job done, and that's all Boise State really needs to do at this point to make the playoff. And then USC over UCLA, not important at all. Just want to say the best uniform game in college football, most aesthetically pleasing game to watch, just from the uniform basis. It's just so good. That blue and gold versus it's great. And then our biggest takeaways from the weekend to wrap it up, starting at number 3, touched on it just a second ago, and that is the Big 12 versus Tulane could be interesting. So when we're looking at Colorado, BYU, ASU, Iowa State, right? It'll be interesting to see where they're placed relative to Tulane, because Tulane beats Memphis and then beats Army as a 2-loss conference champ. We know whoever wins the Big 12 is going to have 2 losses, but if we see something like some upsets happen this final week and somehow Colorado at 3 losses is in there with a 2-loss team, but then Colorado wins or something like that. So it ends up being like a 3-loss conference champion. Would they be ranked ahead of a 2-loss Tulane to get that 5th power or that 5th conference champion slot and likely the 12 seed in the college football playoff? I'm not sure, but I think it'd be really fun to see, really interesting debate. and would complicate things a lot for the playoff. I mean, it's only one spot, but just the Big 12 being left out of the playoff would be pretty crazy when 5 conferences get an automatic bid. So that's that takeaway. Second, the ACC can now get 2 teams in. I was thinking it was just 1, but with Alabama, Ole Miss, and A&M, stumbling down the stretch here, I think it's opened up the gate. So if SMU and Miami play a really tight game in the ACC title and they both still have 1 loss, they win next week, I think the loser of that game could definitely still be in the college football playoff, especially if the committee's trying to set, like a precedent that they're not going to power conference champions so that, concerns are alleviated about that. I think the ACC is now once again alive. It was looking very unlikely, and maybe it still is. We'll see how high SMU moves up in the rankings, but especially because Miami's been pretty high, especially if Miami loses a tight game, maybe it's even likely they get 2 teams in that scenario. And finally, do not lock anything in. I was making predictions. I'm like, yeah, Alabama, I can assume they beat Oklahoma, and then, no, you get crushed. So, yeah, right now, does it look like Ohio State's going to beat Michigan and rematch Oregon? Of course, but don't lock it in. Does it, we don't know what's going to happen in Texas A&M. We don't, you just can't assume any of these things, even when there's 1 week left. Anything can happen. It's been a wild college football season, and you just got to remember, there's going to be chaos. You're probably not going to see it coming. You're not going to predict it. So don't be too confident about anything. That's all I have for this week's college football reaction. Let me know your guys' thoughts in the comments below. Who are your biggest surprises? Who was most impressive to you? What are your biggest takeaways? Make sure to leave it all down below. Make sure to leave a like. Do me a huge favor. Subscribe to the channel. It helps me out a ton. I thank you guys for watching. Until next time.